You know what it's been a while since we've talked about? Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh, that's right. You didn't really think you'd escaped me, did you?
The last time I did a Sonic video on this channel with a name based on Sonic and a mascot character based on Sonic, it was about an obscure book of all things. Before that was my beginner's guide to the franchise last year, which, to be fair, I still think is one of my best videos to date. And before that, the last time I discussed one specific Sonic game in a video was my retrospective analysis of Sonic Adventure 2. So what say you? I think it's about time we move on to greener hills. I've kept you guys waiting long enough, so let's return to the series I love so much. Let's move into the multi-platform age of the franchise with the first major 3D outing that was dropped after SA2 first hit store shelves. That's right, we're talking Sonic Heroes today, baby. And honestly, given the recent uptick in success the channel has been seeing lately, that seems fairly appropriate. I would not nearly be at a point where I could even see mild success talking about video games on the internet if it weren't for all of you guys helping me out. And this is a game all about teamwork. So let's blast through with Sonic speed, shall we? Let's talk about Sonic Team's bold leap into a post-Sega console market and what made Sonic Heroes so special. As always, let's start with a bit of a history lesson. Despite the success of Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, Sonic Adventure DX, and Sonic Mega Collection, a totally new 3D Sonic title had not been seen since Sonic Adventure 2 first dropped on the Dreamcast. Indeed, it seemed Sega was stumped. Their departure from the console market had left them in an uncertain place in regards to where their flagship series was going to go from there. Ports were all well and good. They'd serve their new audience well in catching up with what charms the older entries had to offer if they had grown up strictly on Nintendo properties. But Sega knew the amount of pressure looming over them to deliver a new and interesting Sonic game was going to be heavy, considering all of the factors that were riding on it. Deciding to head back to the drawing board, Sonic Team USA, led again by Takashi Iizuka, deliberately avoided what might have, at the time, seemed like a no-brainer to most die-hard fans: a third Sonic Adventure game. They apparently feared that only core gamers would purchase it if they did, considering that the name Sonic Adventure was already tied to some underlying brand loyalty from the previous console generation. The net they wanted to cast was a lot wider than this. They wanted everybody and their grandmother playing the new Sonic game. And so appealing to just the previous circle of fans wasn't going to cut it. They needed to aim higher. The team wanted to appeal to new and old fans alike, and in working through this idea, they recalled the amount of chatter going on during Sonic Adventure 2's development about what characters would be playable, particularly due to the lack of Tails in early promotional material for it. Fans had been particularly hungry for returning characters and playstyles, which meant that clearly, Heroes would earn points with fans if it had a larger character roster, which Sonic Team decided had to be the biggest yet. Considering how a wide array of playstyles had been a taxing bout of trial and error for them in the past, though, they decided to keep themselves grounded creatively by a unifying concept that would give some structure to their madness. A team-based gameplay system, reminiscent of their experiments with Knuckles Chaotix on the 32X. And speaking of Chaotix, in deciding to expand the character roster for this game, they also decided that they'd reintroduce 3 of that game's characters: Vector the Crocodile, Espio the Chameleon, and Charmy Bee as one of the game's 4 teams, Team Chaotix. All 3 characters would sport new redesigns by the series' modern character designer, Yuji Uekawa, and per Iizuka's decision would be treated as though they were all new characters. In Heroes, they'd become a 3-man detective agency, and their previous ages or personality traits that were established in the Japanese manual for Chaotix would be dropped entirely to usher in these new versions of the characters, effectively retconning their previous selves from existence. Considering that Sonic's canon is all over the place to begin with, though, this was probably just as good a decision as any. In addition, 2 new characters would be created for Heroes as well, that being the successor to E102 Gamma, E123 Omega, and Cream the Rabbit, who, while technically created for Sonic Heroes, actually made her debut, along with her pet Chow Cheese, in the portable title Sonic Advance 2, which was apparently done to freshen up the Sonic Advance sequel and also make players familiar with her by the time Heroes proper actually rolled around. Fan-favorite character Metal Sonic was brought back to serve as the twist villain of this game, having seen a great demand for a proper return from fans since his explosive debut in Sonic CD. Considering his last big villain role in the series was in Knuckles Chaotix, which this game borrowed a lot of its elements from and was basically responsible for retconning, it seems only fitting that this would be his big comeback moment for the franchise, and he even received an updated redesign by his original designer, Kazuyuki Hoshino. The game was developed with the intention of releasing it not only for GameCube, but also PC, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. The process was a lot more difficult for them than they'd first reckoned, though, because of the team's lack of familiarity with the PS2 and Xbox in particular. It's likely because of this that the PS2 version of the game specifically is the least optimized, suffering from a lot of graphical issues, clipping, and a lower frame rate, things that are much less of an issue in other releases. To hype the game's release and let the world at large know that Sonic was back in a big way, 2003 was dubbed the Year of Sonic, which Sega certainly hasn't gotten tired of reusing since then, and saw many different pushes for the franchise in different venues. It was the year that the anime series Sonic X debuted. It saw the release of Sonic Pinball Party and Sonic Battle. The series' advertising was cranked up to an all-time high, and of course, it got new McDonald's Happy Meals for the first time since Ronald McDonald split Sonic 3 in half.
Get happy!
The demo for Sonic Heroes was even included with some early copies of Mario Kart Double Dash, which, that was a huge deal because, come on, just think of how many people were playing Double Dash back then. After all of this, Sonic Heroes would finally hit the market in Japan on December 30th, with a Western release following in February of 2004. Ironically, despite 2003 being the year of Sonic, its major title ended up missing the coveted holiday push window due to production delays, which really does prove that this was, at the end of the day, a game in the Sonic franchise. They can just never resist pushing themselves for that holiday release, can they? The game, as I stated before, revolves around team-based gameplay, with 4 selectable teams from the very start. Team Sonic consists of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, and is basically the normal mode of the game. Team Dark is made up of Shadow, Rouge, and Omega, with stages tending to run a bit longer than Team Sonic's and contain more combat encounters, making it the hard mode, essentially. Team Rose is the proving ground of series underdogs Amy, Cream, and Big, with the shortest overall stages mostly starting and ending after and before Team Sonic stages do, respectively. And then there's Team Chaotix, sporting the redesigned, reinvented trio of Espio, Charmy, and Vector, who travel the same stages as everybody else, but are given a bit of variety in that their levels are all mission-based, usually involving destroying a specific number of enemies or objects, or locating a certain amount of items. The stories for all these teams going on the same journey is ultimately pretty simple when all is said and done. Team Sonic is just pursuing Eggman after receiving a cryptic letter hinting at his renewed intentions for world domination, Tuesday as usual. Although the letter itself is hilarious, and then not only does it seem weirdly holographic, but it opens with, "Dear Sonic Heroes, guess what, Sonic Heroes?" Did anyone proofread this before it was sent? Team Rose are simply after their own respective missing friends. Froggy for Big, because he can never hold on to the little bastard. Chocola the Chow for Cream, and, Amy is chasing Sonic, but not because he's missing. Having seen a strange newspaper article that shows Sonic with the other two, it seems their paths have intersected in this regard, so naturally they team up. Team Chaotix are a bunch of bumbling detectives who need work to pay rent, the most relatable motivation for a group of characters in this series so far. And after receiving a mysterious transceiver assigning missions to them, they follow where the money leads, and that's about it. The most complex of these stories is arguably Team Dark's, but only insofar as that the trio is a bit more fleshed out direction-wise in this game than the others are. Rouge, searching for valuables that Eggman has stashed away, discovers the sleeping body of Shadow the Hedgehog, locked away in a stasis capsule deep in his base. Understandably surprised because of Shadow's presumed death at the end of Adventure 2, it takes Rouge a moment to realize that Shadow has amnesia and can't remember who he is or where he comes from, just that he's named Shadow and is the ultimate life form, whatever that is. In the same room, he's being guarded by E123 Omega, a certified death machine of a robot who is basically just pissed that Eggman squandered his potential by having him rot in a sealed room, and now wants to stick it to his former master by destroying all of his toys. Realizing that all of the things they want intersect with Eggman, they decide to team up and hunt down the Doctor, becoming a genuinely closely knit unit of morally ambiguous people who really care about one another in the process. This story does go a bit deeper in some places too, but more on that later. The basic gameplay is similar to that of other 3D Sonics before it in terms of actual level structure. The levels are composed of many platforms, runways, and grind rails to explore throughout high-speed gameplay, where you collect rings, gather item boxes, defeat enemies, and try to reach the goal ring at the end of the stage, barring the missions of Team Chaotix's campaign, that is. The major difference here compared to, say, Adventure 1 or 2 lies in the team aspects that Sonic Heroes is named for. Each team is composed of 3 members with their own specialized skill set. The speed type is for traditional Sonic-style platforming and running, equipped with a homing attack for precision targeting or chaining across lines of enemies midair, a tornado attack which can disorient or flip enemies while also allowing the team to fly along large poles, a rocket excel which fulfills the role of the spin dash from other games, but honestly not nearly as well, and the triangle jump for Sonic, Shadow, and SBO only, which is basically like a wall jump that you can use to cross pits. No idea why Amy can't do this, though. Maybe because Team Rose was sort of a beginner-friendly mode, they figured cutting down on mechanics would be to younger kids' benefit while playing as them? Who knows? The flight type grabs onto everyone totem pole style and is easily the slowest of the bunch, which makes them pretty useful for getting your bearings, but most useful in situations where crossing pits or raising up to higher paths is a necessity. Though you're going to want to watch their stamina bar because it goes quickly, and once it runs out, they drop like rocks. They're also good for attacking enemies that fly higher up in the air with the Thunder Shoot, though this is an attack that without leveling is rather useless aside from stunning enemies for easier access. Though to be fair, it becomes an absolute tank when it is leveled. Oh, right, forgot to mention the leveling. You see, at the beginning of each stage, all of your team members' strengths are at a set level, and by destroying enemies you can obtain these little power cores of the corresponding formation colors which level that team member up, making their abilities stronger. While a cool idea in concept, I feel like this often gets kind of intrusive at times. Okay, back to formations. Our last formation is the power type, which aren't as slow as the flight type, but aren't as prone to zip all over the place as the speed type is. Going at a more measured pace, the power type is focused on, well, what else? Destructive force. They can sweep through waves of enemies with extremely powerful attacks, and also break through barriers obstructing the path forward. They also each have some type of variation of hovering ability that they can use over large fans to carry the team along into the air, although this is more of a float in specialized areas than the manual and controlled flight of the flight-type characters, although sometimes the airtime can get pretty ridiculous compared to the standard flight, so it's a little more useful in some places than others, I suppose. Also new to Heroes are enemies with health bars, instead of them just all being one-hit kills. This coincides with an increased focus on combat overall, as certain enemies are more vulnerable to specific formations, incentivizing you to use them more frequently as you can't just tank your way through everything with just one of them. I understand this decision, and in most cases I don't really mind it, but in a lot of others this can definitely lead to the level pacing being very bogged down by enemy encounters that drag out for far too long, artificially extending the length of the stage to a sometimes absurd extent. I think this part of Heroes level design is what people regard least fondly though, while the team system gets kind of a bad rep for being associated with it. I think the team mechanic itself though is actually rather soundly handled. It lends itself to a very natural flow state, I found, where you become very quickly acclimated to who can do what efficiently, and find yourself switching up on the fly like it's second nature. It's very satisfying to string together formation changes in the heat of action to constantly ride the flow state of your actions, which is what I would argue is one of the core appeals of a Sonic game's design, the ability to maintain that flow state via skillful traversal of the level and mastery of the game's overall mechanics. Sonic games are more and more of a rewarding venture to those who get something out of replaying the stages over and over again, and in this regard I think Sonic Heroes definitely succeeds, despite some trip-ups that make it slightly less fun for me to spend time replaying than other titles before it. One of those trip-ups, though, has obviously got to be the physics, particularly with the speed and power types. If you've played this game before, you already know what I'm talking about. The speed-type character's acceleration is borderline nonsensically fast, which will have you slamming into things, veering off into different directions on a dime while trying to turn, and falling into bottomless pits to your death rather often. This isn't to wax hyperbole and insist this will be happening to you every moment of your playtime, because truth be told, you can get decently good at avoiding the BS when you've gotten a good grip of the physics at hand, and the starting speed is fairly controllable and typical of this playstyle. But this is one of those infamous learning curves of Sonic control style that, in this case, I don't necessarily think was as intentional as other entries' physics were, and as a result, this can lead to a lot of frustration, particularly for first-time players. A not as frequent, but still crotch-stompingly maddening issue is with the power character's barrage attacks. While attacking with the power character, they often move in bold strides and sweeps that carry them forward automatically while in the frenzy of battle, often because you're facing rows after rows of enemies or being surrounded by them. In this context, that makes sense, but the only problem is that much of Sonic Heroes level design is fond of level geometry being situated in a seemingly floating void, meaning the majority of platforms you traverse in the game will prove to be death traps if you fly off the side of them. And with the character sliding all over the place across a tiny platform, yeah, you're gonna be flying off the side of them, even if you try your very hardest not to. And this is extremely frustrating because not only is it a cheap death that sets you back, this combined with the sometimes tiring level length can mean you're really getting set back when you wish you'd been done with the stage at least 5 to 6 minutes ago. It's funny, actually, that in a lot of cases I've heard 3D Sonic controls up until this point in the franchise described as equally slippery or uncontrollable, but when this sentiment has been expressed about the adventure games, I've never understood it. Even as a kid, I found Sonic's controls in those games to be fairly intuitive and well handled. Maybe not perfect, but certainly not difficult. By contrast, I feel like a crazy person describing my problems with the physics in Sonic Heroes because it's the exact same complaints, I just agree this time. And to be clear, I'd still defend the physics in Adventure 1 and 2 to the death for the most part, but it's just funny that this time around I actually have to concede that the crowd has a point, where before, I otherwise considered the claim a bit strange and born out of impatience. This is probably because Heroes suffers from something in more ways than the adventure titles in their original releases ever suffered from, though, and that's a lack of polish. That's not to say anything of the game's actual quality in terms of structure or ideas, to be clear. I'm not saying Sonic Heroes is a bad game, far from it. But it's difficult to deny that a lot of edges feel rough, and many aspects of the game feel very rushed. There are more occasions than Sonic Heroes where I died of something and felt like I just didn't do anything wrong than any other 3D Sonic game I've played until this point. Many of the team who worked on the game agree with me on this too, because many of them have come forward since its development to stress that it probably would have even had sounder design if it weren't for the deadlines they were forced to abide. Even poor old Izuka apparently lost weight working on it and developed insomnia too. This thing was hard to whip into shape, and honestly, it just needed more time in the oven that Sega corporate just wasn't willing to give them, because they had to have something to buy after all those Happy Meal ads, damn it! And this unfortunately made marathoning through the game for the sake of this video all the more frustrating, and let me be upfront, this game is not really meant to be marathoned through. The 4 team campaigns are complementary, all encompassing the same base experience to some extent, and are supposed to be equally satisfying, with that satisfaction urging curious players to continue on and eventually unlock the final story segment as a reward for their efforts. Playing all 4 campaigns in a row obviously exhausted me and made me a bit more cynical about this game's technical failings, but only because I had to experience them all in a row while becoming increasingly exhausted as a result. I'm sure that if I had taken my time with it over weeks or maybe even months of time like I did when I first played the game as a child, I'd have a much fonder overall outlook on it and be far more forgiving of its shortcomings. So take that as you will. One aspect new to this game that I didn't really get as tired of as some other people did, however, is probably the new emphasis on mid-stage dialogue. Yep, this is the first 3D Sonic game to have the characters regularly chattering during the levels themselves. And yeah, the repeat lines can get pretty tiresome pretty quickly, but thankfully I have a mod that disables repeat lines and only lives the original stage dialogue, thank God for this community sometimes. The talking among teams is actually pretty charming to me, providing a lot of unique perspective into the levels themselves and also a lot of fun character building moments for the teams, as they discuss certain things about the level or just in general, and showcases a lot of their individual personality traits and relationships with each other.
Yes, just as I thought.
Must be my lucky day!
What's it doing here? Let's go.
This is a bit too much.
Activating balance servos.
Let me handle this. Let's leave it to Amy.
Amy could do it.
It was here all along.
Hey, there's something here.
All in a day's work, boys.
And let's be blunt here, as cheesy as the dialogue can sometimes get in this game, and it can get really cheesy, I missed the level of actual characterization on display here. Before the franchise became content to simply pump out low-effort Saturday morning cartoon plots in its mainline games, this series actually had something of an ambition to be character-driven and full of its own continuity and personality. Even little things about this game's character interactions really charm me, like Knuckles referring back to Mushroom Hill from Sonic 3 when he sees the overgrown stalks in Frog Forest, Amy referring back to the Egg Carrier from Sonic Adventure when she sees the massive Eggman fleet ships. Or even Sonic's cheeky reference back to his own dialogue in Sonic Adventure 2 when he sees Shadow again for the first time since he presumably, fell from space and died horribly. These characters all feel like natural extensions of themselves who have experienced the last handful of game plots before this. They seem consistent with themselves, and this lends an overall cohesiveness and familiarity to them that for fans up until this point really established that this was a series where you could come to feel immersed in a world that you knew and loved. And this kind of care and attention to detail is something I think is sorely lacking in the age of Sonic headed by cartoonish stereotypes of characters that feel like borderline parodies of themselves accrued by hasty Wikipedia readings. Not referring to IDW Sonic, though. I know it has its own restraints that it often gets held back by, but I love you guys. Easily the best Sonic story content we've gotten in the past while, at least in an official capacity. This kind of charm, I think, is what makes me newly appreciative and nostalgic for Heroes in a way that I think I maybe took for granted as a cynical teen. Back then, this style of Sonic world and story was the standard, and so Heroes' flaws were easier to rag on. But now, with a fresh perspective and a whole lot more cynicism for the current series direction, I look back pretty fondly on the amount of enjoyment I can get from the way the characters are portrayed in this game. Well, maybe Amy is a bit flanderized, though. I enjoy the idea of her becoming a bit of a headstrong leader type, and this would certainly be a point of characterization that would suit her even better in other canon material. But at the same time, this definitely begins the era of Amy where they forgot she was supposed to be seeking independence and respect from Sonic, and lean a little too far into the women be crazy humor for my liking. It's not at its worst in Heroes. In fact, I find her still pretty great most of the time in Heroes. But this would also follow with things like Sonic Battle, which easily has some of the worst Amy characterization to date, and I do not miss that. Speaking of a charming world, though, nice segue, am I right? Let's actually talk about those stages, shall we? Sonic Heroes consists of 14 stages for each team to play, all of which are in the same order and in the same basic structure in each campaign, unlike the adventure games. There are also 7 bosses, 2 of which being battles with other teams, which kinda suck, and 2 of which also being basically enemy barrages, which kinda get boring, leaving 3 bosses as actual fights with Eggman mechs. More on those as we get to them. The first area has a unique tutorial section to it as well, the Sea Gate. It's pretty helpful for babies, I suppose. Okay, no, truthfully, it's decent at teaching all the mechanics to newcomers. It's just incredibly handholdy and can get pretty tiresome with Omochao dropping in every 2 seconds to interrupt everything you do. Like, I get it. You don't have to be so patronizing. The first stage proper begins in Seaside Hill, a lush and beautiful coastal area, which sure does kind of crib from a mix of Green Hill and Emerald Coast, but also has its own unique flair that I feel makes it a lot more like its own place than just a derivative mashup. In fact, that's something I should probably briefly speak on before we get ahead of ourselves. Yes, the Sonic Heroes levels are very clearly inspired by a lot of classic Sonic design tropes, and before anyone calls me a hypocrite for liking this while decrying the over-reliance on nostalgic imagery that Sonic dwells in so much these days, this is exactly the distinction that I think sets these approaches apart. Sonic Heroes very clearly has a lot of classic Sonic design influences, but is suitably grander of scope in many ways while also managing to add many original ideas to the mix. Unique ruins and structures, power grids and holographic circuits, train cars and mesas, and even an inverse castle with cool gravity mechanics. All of this stuff manages to be just as original as it is familiar, and this balance I think goes a long way to establish these locales' unique charms. Okay, now that that's out of my system, Seaside Hill will see you traversing the outer ranges and encroaching upon the beaches, where eventually it intersects into the whale-inspired ruins of a palace. This is a great introductory stage, which has a perfect starting difficulty and plenty of personality to back it up, while remaining suitably familiar for a first Sonic stage. This leads into the second stage, Ocean Palace, where you go deeper into the palace itself and spend a lot of time traveling between different indoor and outdoor sections of the ruins themselves, traversing staircases, avoiding traps, and exploring the architecture, all leading to a big chase with booby-trapped death wheels in true 3D Sonic fashion. Throughout both of these stages, you're eased into Heroes' design philosophy very well. Sure, there's a bit more stop-and-go elements here than most would expect out of a Sonic game, but even some of the series' best outings, like Sonic 3, had these elements as well. But as long as they were mechanically satisfying, they could work. These acts serve to get you used to the rhythm of the game, and also accustom you to the flow of it. Throughout these starting sections, you don't have to worry as much about manually changing your formation, as these color gates will automatically do it for you when you pass through them, taking away some of the multi-management the later game will be demanding of you in favor of letting you focus on your moment-to-moment actions, and demonstrating to you what your priorities should be in different contexts. Team Rose kinda stays this way the whole time with the color gate thing, but because it's the easy mode for the babies, I guess that kinda makes sense. Signs also linger around displaying what formation can tackle varying paths, and both of these elements will become scarcer as the game goes, as it gets a bit more confident in believing that you should have learned enough to make these choices on your own by then, although the signs still linger well into even the final zone, so this can still get a bit handholdy at times, unfortunately. The boss is the Hedgehog, a big, hawk robot, which is honestly pretty pathetic. All you have to do is chase it down on foot briefly, wait for it to land, and then use a power character to start wailing on it. The amount of blows you get in will also make it pretty easy to build up a Team Blast, which, wait crap, I haven't mentioned Team Blast yet, have I? A Team Blast is basically a special screen clearing move, which is built up from collecting rings or dealing damage to enemies, and can be executed when its gauge is filled. Though the Team Blast one-shots crowds of enemies, it also does massive damage to bosses, while not immediately destroying them outright. It can be a pretty useful move to keep track of for certain situations, as it can be advantageous to save for screen clearing if you reach a particularly tough group of enemies you'd rather breeze past, incentivizing you to hold on to it and save it for efficient times if you could otherwise deal with an annoying patch of enemies easily enough without it. That being said, the Hedgehog goes down pretty easily, Team Blast or not, which leads us on our way to the second locale of the game, the city. Yeah, this game's zones don't really connect together as cohesively as, say, the adventure games did with its stages. This game also leans more into the classic Sonic design ethos of just doing aesthetically whatever the hell it wants to, while keeping the story reasons for these abrupt transitions rather minimal. I don't really mind this philosophy much, however, as while I certainly can appreciate the continuity of design in the adventure games, I do have to say that I love the locales of heroes and find the inconsistency in them to be more of a strength than a detriment to the game's overall aesthetic, considering it just tends to breathe more visual variety into it all. All of it still feels fittingly grand in a fittingly Sonic sense, and the visual identity at play here seems very in line with what I would expect from a Sonic game, so I enjoy it. The Grand Metropolis is where the city starts, taking place on more of the outer parts of the city and slowly getting closer to the inner city as the stage progresses. There are long stretches of flashily lit roads that automatically push you forward, generators being sucked of energy from Eggman's robots, which can be restored and have their energy redirected back to the city proper by destroying them, and lots of blimps and architecture to scale. It's very sci-fi looking and has a lot of charm in that respect. I think it's my least favorite aesthetically of the game, truthfully, but that doesn't diminish from its success in being appealing nonetheless. Subsequently, the power plant takes you more into the inner parts of the city, but consists of a lot more indoor sections than I would like. The expansive skyline view of the city at the beginning is breathtaking, and I kinda wish we'd gotten to see more of that represented in this zone, but I can also understand that maybe hardware limitations would have made that a bit difficult. Nevertheless, it does have a cool chase sequence at the end for the teams that aren't Team Rose or Chaotix, involving a fast rise of magma up a vertical shaft, pushing you to think quickly and use your formations to scale to the top before it gets out of control and swallows you whole in lava. This used to scare the piss out of me as a kid, much more than the previous zone's wheels, that's for sure. And speaking of Team Chaotix, while the collect hermit crabs and chow missions from the ocean locale were pretty harmless in their first zone, Grand Metropolis requiring you to destroy tons of enemies isn't fun no matter how much I slice it. And that's made even weirder by the comparably much more lax challenge of destroying only a few of the golden-shelled turtles in Power Plant directly after. But hey, whatever, I'm not the one making the missions. The city will also see you fighting your first team battle, with Team Sonic facing Team Rose and vice versa, and Team Dark facing Team Chaotix, also vice versa. The reasonings are pretty funny for both, with Team Rose seemingly leading the charge to beat the hell out of Sonic just to enforce Amy's shotgun marriage to him, but making a bit more sense when you see mid-fight that they're also concerned about Sonic's seeming kidnapping of Chocola and Froggy, which, you know, we know isn't true, but certainly builds a bit more intrigue as to who the person from Amy's newspaper clipping could have been. Team Dark's motivation for fighting the Chaotix, on the other hand, is a bit flimsier, with Rouge seeming to randomly assume that they're after the same Eggman treasure stash she is, although she does at least reflect briefly on how she might have overreacted in the next stage. Character dynamics aside though, the team battles are little more than chaotic button mashers designed to be so inscrutable that you never really feel as if you win on purpose, so much as by complete luck of the draw. They're almost always piss easy unless the opposing team decides to arbitrarily never die, and there's basically no middle ground. You're getting one or the other. Thankfully, these are usually over very quickly, but I can't say they're very solidly constructed by any standards of game design. After you have some furries beat each other up, it's time for the patented Sonic Casino locale, starting with Casino Park. As beautiful as this locale is, with bright colors, wonderful theming, and tons of fun aesthetic variety, this is easily the worst set of levels in the game for me. There's a large reliance on a pinball gimmick in both stages, with an equally frustrating and difficult to control bingo table in the second stage, Bingo Highway, which makes both of them a nightmare to control properly. You'll inevitably be spending a lot of time trying to navigate these stupid tables with the most finicky pinball controls I've ever had the displeasure of having to persevere through, and this can make even the more standard platforming sections of these levels feel like small potatoes, when the rest of the stage's pacing is so bogged down by these. Not to mention the overall lack of polish really standing out here, with seemingly random intervals of characters getting stuck on the tables and phasing out of existence, and the equally harrowing and frustrating bingo tables which seem impossible to steer yourself on without sliding off the side and dying, leaving your success in these sections less to your own talent and more to the whim of God. This is where the frustration of Sonic Heroes really begins to rear its ugly head, in other words. But hey, there are also some more unique enemy types introduced here too, eh? As the journey started with Eggman's new standard egg pawns, they've gradually introduced variants with shields and other heavy types like the turtles, and now we have armored enemies, enemies with motion detectors that can call backup if you're not stealthy, and these freaking things which to anyone who's played this game are a jump scare, because if they so much as nudge into you directly, they immobilize and steal one of your teammates and can only be stopped if you destroy them very quickly. These things scared me more than basically anything else in the game as a child, honestly. They're just so cold and freaky, and their dead eyes combined with their big long arms and their instant immobilization and ability to permanently steal a team member was the perfect combination of nightmare fuel. Like, where is he taking Knuckles? Where is Knuckles going? Will I ever see him again? Is he dead? But anywho, if you manage to stave off those nightmares for long enough to reach the boss though, you'll maybe be disappointed to learn that it's just an enemy bombardment called Robot Carnival, which just pits you against varied waves of standard enemy types that you've faced up until this point. It's fine, I guess, but it's pretty boring all things considered, although we do get a little story update here as far as Team Dark is concerned, with Shadow asking Eggman about his past and getting told that he has no past to remember, which is definitely another thing to be curious about and tuck into our back pockets. The next zone is the canyon, starting with Rail Canyon. This vast expanse of desert dunes suspended over rails is often considered one of the sharpest upticks of difficulty in the game, with many decrying it as their personal worst stage because of it. The rail physics can be pretty finicky and unforgiving to those who haven't mastered it, and even to those who have, so I definitely understand this complaint. This is also the point of the game where you'll start to really notice these stages dragging themselves out, and that's something I said before that I really didn't enjoy about this game, so I feel it there too. Truth be told though, I still get a big kick out of this locale and find a lot of the rail grinding to be a thrill, combined with the cool train design motifs and the frankly dope horned bullet trains that swirl around like a weird train Ouroboros, lending this stage and the one after it, Bullet Station, a lot of kick-ass flair that I'm really fond of in a Sonic game. Rail Canyon is mostly focused on the outer parts of the canyon and gradually get closer to the mesa base that Eggman has built once you go further into Bullet Station, climaxing in an awesome shot out of a cannon where you blast Eggman's face-shaped base off the map. That is just undeniably so sick that I don't even know what to say. This is also what you could qualify as the halfway point of the game, which kinda takes you through a cool fake-out, because this seems to be the most urgent moment so far, at least in terms of Team Sonic's campaign, as Tails points out that they only have 24 hours left at this point before Eggman's plan is apparently set into motion. This is, of course, brilliantly demonstrated as the ploy it is after you face down with the boss of this zone, the Egg Albatross, which I'd say is a bit better than the Egg Hawk in its resilience, but still suffers from a lot of the same button mashing issues, combined with some potential for cheap deaths caused by the physics and knockback. After you defeat it, Sonic and Co. realize that the Eggman that they've been chasing after this whole time was a robot duplicate, and that this whole fight was a ploy to stall for time so Eggman could launch his air fleet. Before fully running off, Tails stays behind for a moment, observing the Eggman duplicate that they just fought, seeing that it doesn't appear to be the handiwork of Eggman himself. and just narrowly misses the Terminator-style goop forming into a newly redesigned Neo-Metal Sonic, who declares that he's copied their lifeform data. Ooh, boy, that's intrigue. This is ramped up even more with Team Dark and Chaotix, the former having a sobering moment with Shadow witnessing a destroyed clone of himself in the wreckage, causing him to further question the legitimacy of his own identity, after so many capsules like the one Rouge found were scattered throughout the canyon, go figure. And the latter being admittedly a bit on the nose with its suggestive hints towards the twist, but still making clear that more is going on here besides Eggman just pulling his usual BS. Metal Sonic also makes an appearance here to declare his copying of more data, including that of Shadow's, which is sure to lend even more to his growing power pool, God help us all. From here, we move on into the Jungle Zone, which is a bit more standard, but still nevertheless unique and beautiful in its own way. The lush greenery combined with the forest's tendency to grow rapidly at much larger than usual sizes is something to behold, which I'm sure would have fit the concept designs even more, considering they seem to imply that dinosaurs were originally a part of this equation. What we get instead is still cool though, with the first stage Frog Forest introducing us to the main gimmick of the zone, giant frogs. These frogs, when alerted, will cause instantaneous rain to fall, which causes the plant life to rapidly grow, leading to really cool moments of gameplay like entire stalks with platforms shooting up, and vines that act as grind rails forming moment by moment in front of you as you grind across them. We also get some pretty cool set pieces like riding a helicopter-style flower, or descending inside of a tree trunk lit by the beautiful hue of fireflies. You start out high above the forest, observing the sky-high plant life that has risen due to the nurturing rains. And then as you go, you descend further into the jungle below, getting to see more of the native life and also dwell closer to the swamps. This zone isn't all beauty, however, as proven by several things. First, the level geometry starts to become a bit more content with its opportunities to slide off into the abyss, taking a lot of its cues from the canyon before it in this regard. Second, it introduces the biggest enemies in the game, these huge guys with hammers that can really only be adequately taken out with power characters. Given the size of the terrain that they're usually on, you'll find more often than not that the biggest challenge of fighting them is avoiding another pit death, whether it be from sliding around or knockback. And thirdly, once you reach Lost Jungle, there are these stupid frogs. No, they're not the same ones as the first kind, these are a different palette, and therefore they do the opposite thing as their counterparts do. Instead of creating rain that brings life, they create rain that brings death, destroying platforming stalks, killing plants that topple and can harm you, and making the screen dark and difficult to see in. This certainly doesn't help during the chase segment at the end of this stage, where a giant alligator chases you across vines that require quick but precise button presses, which I swear to God only work when they feel like it. It's really easy to die at this part, and as a piss-scared 7-year-old, I got more than my share of game overs to it. The segment seems to last even longer as Team Dark, but whether that's true or I just imagined it, it's still not very fun to deal with. Thankfully, Team Rose and Chaotix avoid it. I assume Team Rose does because it'd be too hard for the newbies, and Team Chaotix is busy with the mission, which is good for them because I can only imagine how Vector would feel about this. This zone ends with the second of the two team battles, with Team Sonic facing Team Dark and Team Rose facing Team Chaotix. Their reasons for fighting are once again sort of laughable, with the Sonic Dark debacle resembling more of a land dispute over who gets to continue on to beat up Eggman, mixed with a dose of, "Dude, Shadow, please stop hitting me, we're friends, what the hell, man?" and Rose versus Chaotix basically amounting to,
"Hey, can I ask you some questions?"
"I don't respond to catcalls."
"You are literally a toddler. I am not catcalling you."
"Anyway, we've been tasked with collecting chows, so give us yours."
"You are literally perverts and kidnappers." And finally, "I'm confused, let's beat each other up."
Did you get any of that?
Although to be fair, I do get quite a kick out of Sonic and Shadow meeting back up. The aforementioned callback to their face-off in Adventure 2 is charming, and it's very intriguing to see Shadow, who's been struggling with his memory up until this point, almost naturally slide back into a cheeky rivalry with Sonic, and then also question himself about why Sonic seems so familiar to him. It's kind of cute that his time with Sonic apparently had so much of an impact on him that even through the veneer of literal amnesia, he just couldn't bring himself to completely forget about the Blue Hedgehog. I promise this isn't propaganda for my ship, I'm just saying. What better way to follow up an adventure in the jungle, though, than with the Haunted Mansion? Yeah, a very natural progression. This zone is honestly one of my favorites in Sonic history in terms of theming and aesthetic. It's a creepy castle with ghosts and ghoulies roaming its many caverns, halls, and even outer architecture. It all resides within this sort of ghoulish nighttime void that seems to swallow you into itself and toy with you the further you go into it. There are peeping skeletons who dance out of view, jack-o'-lantern ghosts that appear to cackle into the night, wizard robots that become fiercer when they're flipped over, and switches that change the gravity of the castle at will, which even changes the music track as you do. This level also showcases a really cool example of the creative design going on in Heroes, in that when a gravity switch is activated, you're actually taken to a separate part of the map which duplicates the respective level section but upside down, and with its items and enemies flipped alongside it. That's a really cool touch that I just find so admirable and creative about this place. The zone begins with Hang Castle, which takes place more on the periphery of the castle, exploring its many towers and even running down the side of one of the walls while activating gravity panels, searching for ways to infiltrate and trying to deal with the wacky Halloween attractions that this level throws your way, like invisible walkways lit by torches. The second stage, Mystic Mansion, takes you within the center of ghoul activity itself, becoming more over the top with its haunted mansion vibes, and showing off a lot more decorative flair as a result. There's a bobsled section through a haunted minecart shaft, and honestly, if there's one thing I needed in a Sonic game, it was this. There's no real story development to speak of here, and the boss is another frustrating enemy wave in Robot Storm, but honestly, all of that is easily forgiven when you consider the amount of sheer stylistic madness going on here. It's truly a delight from start to finish, with even its more frustrating sections being cushioned by its strong and creative sense of direction. The Chaotix mission to blow out like 60 torches sucks, though, you got me there. And then, finally, after a long journey culminating to this point, you reach the final zone, Eggman's airship. This is one of the grandest of scope final levels in Sonic history, and although it's easy to chalk up the breadth of some of the background elements here in the modern day as just JPEGs floating through the skies, it's hard not to be taken a little aback by just how massive this feels. This zone, beginning with Egg Fleet, sees you literally scaling across various different airborne vessels that Eggman's forces are piloting. It becomes more apparent than ever the amount of raw power and resources this guy can scrounge together with even a little bit of time and effort. As comedic of a villain as Eggman can often be, it's hard to look at something like this and not recognize him for the immediate danger he is. But that being said, it serves to be even more empowering to the player who's come this far and learned so much along the way, to put all of their skills to the test in a truly epic of scope final gauntlet that sees you blowing these massive ships to Kingdom Come and fighting through waves of Eggman's best robots yet, all while stylishly flying through the air and avoiding precarious death trap after precarious death trap with a confident sense of purpose and, most of all, attitude. We even get another cool story-related Easter egg here, not just in the Adventure 1 references that I mentioned before, but also in Shadow's thoughtful and somewhat dire reaction to being told by Rouge that they're close to space. Guess for some reason he remembers space being a pretty important place to him, huh? This is one of the best final areas in a video game in my opinion, and perfectly sells the feeling I get from Sonic the Hedgehog as a whole. The fun doesn't stop there, though, as obviously the second act and last level of the game, Final Fortress, has to up the ante even further. You're on the last of Eggman's ships now, and they're so massive they look like their own flying city. The skies are dark with storm clouds, thunder, rumbles, and quakes as you bear down on all the electronic insanity below, besieged by the toughest enemy combinations and hazardous obstacles you've faced yet. The pacing of the level can be a bit bogged down by repeated combat interludes, sure, but I feel this is also fitting in that it is really a final test of all you've learned up until this point. Your state of flow, your mastery of the mechanics, your ability to efficiently use your team, all of that is under scrutiny as you head into this exam of a final gauntlet, hoping to pass with flying colors as you destroy each ship one by one, before finally evading a giant death laser, throwing the final switch, and blowing Eggman's base to smithereens, bringing his ambitions crashing back down to the Earth. But obviously you're not going to get off the hook with just that. We need a boss to wrap this all up, right? Well, you get that in the form of the Egg Emperor. Wait, it's not a bird, right? Hawk and Albatross were before this. Why is that? Wait, Emperor, like the penguin! Okay, I take it back. That's kind of adorable. I don't know that that's the vibe that Eggman was going for, but you know what? I don't care. Unfortunately, I can't say that this guy is that challenging to coincide with his excellent zone, as much as he is just kind of annoying. First-time players will be quick to find that he has a lot of cheap shots that punish mistakes rather severely with easy knockbacks and easy deaths. veterans will find he has his fair share of exploits that make him go down in little to no time flat. The design is here, and is a bit more nuanced than the button mashing from previous bosses, which I appreciate. Clearly they meant for certain sections of the boss to line up with each formation's unique skills, but it's just a bit too haphazard and easily exploitable for me to consider it a truly great boss, rather than just a slightly better one than the rest, which is kind of a shame because I feel like this would make the end of a playthrough a bit more satisfying. Instead, though, for that we get the conclusion to each team's individual campaign narratives, which, to be fair, have some really nice stuff contained within. Team Sonic is a pretty cut-and-dry case of all's well that ends well, with a bit of comedy added in with Amy chasing down Sonic. There's still some cute character moments here, though, like Knuckles trying to poke fun at Sonic, saying he couldn't have done any of this without his own and Tails' help, to which Sonic responds rather earnestly that he's right, and thanks Knuckles, which produces a look of surprise on the echidna's face. This is kind of adorable, honestly. It's charming to see the extent to which their friendship has developed from when they first met in Sonic 3. You really get the sense that these two have been through a lot together, from starting off as enemies, setting aside their differences, still butting heads on the occasion, and now coming to really respect each other after all the experiences they've shared and the amount they've had to rely on each other to get through. Team Rose is a bit weirder, honestly, because, like much of the rest of their story, it lacks a lot of the same substance that the other team's stories do. Everybody finds who they were looking for, they don't question the weird melting Eggman they see, and okay. Although we do get another little hint at what's to come and why Metal Sonic would have been interested in kidnapping Froggy and Chocola in the first place. Oh, a bit of fun continuity there, I see. For those of you who don't remember, back in Sonic Adventure 1, Froggy temporarily possessed part of Chaos's body and was sought out by Eggman for it. This must have ended up leaving him with some residual DNA from the Water God monster, and so, in an attempt to reverse engineer enough data to copy in order to harness Chaos's power, Metal takes Froggy and a Chow, which we already know from Word of God is what Chaos started out as, having mutated into what he is now through exposure to Chaos energy. That's a pretty clever plan, actually, and it's something most people wouldn't really pick up on unless they were really looking out for the continuity here. It's subtle, but it works. Good job, guys. Team Dark's ending is easily my favorite of the bunch. Having seemingly accomplished their mission, Rouge finally enters Eggman's base to find out what his treasure is, and discovers a stash of endless Shadow clones in similar stasis pods to the one she found hers in. This leads her to question whether or not the Shadow on their team is even the one she knew originally in Adventure 2. And in a bold move that's never really been attempted in the series since this game, they don't confirm it one way or the other. This is basically left an open plot thread, with a good show of the closeness built by Team Dark over the course of the game being cemented, and the seemingly cold Omega being the first one to provide Rouge some comfort here, claiming that even if their Shadow is a clone, the original must exist somewhere. Rouge exits the room to find Shadow waiting for her and claims that now that her hunt's gone up in smoke, she might return to trying to thieve the Master Emerald she previously gave up on, leading Shadow to say, with somewhat teasing familiarity, that some things never change, further hinting that he may remember more deep down than he realizes, further tempting us to ponder about whether Shadow is actually the one from SA2 or not. It's pretty cool stuff, which genuinely touches on something a bit emotional, and given that Shadow's characterization in Heroes is still consistent with his writing in SA2 at this point, and not approaching the dumpster fire it would become in his solo game,
We'll talk about that some other time.
it's pretty refreshing to see this kind of subtlety and nuance pulled off here. Once again, major props must go to the scenario writer for this game, who was also the lead writer of SA2 itself, Shiro Maekawa. The guy is responsible for some of the best stories in the series, and even when restricted by a simpler outline and much more gameplay-focused script, the guy still managed to sneak in some real character gems that shine through even to this day. That's talent. We could really use another game in the series with the story headed by this man. Team Chaotix's ending is the last, but certainly not the least, answering a question we pretty much already knew the answer to since at least Rail Canyon, but probably even earlier. Who was their mysterious client? Why, it was Dr. Eggman, of course, the real Dr. Eggman, locked away by Metal Sonic, who's been operating this whole plan by himself. Of course, while this was also a cool twist for kids who may not have as immediately recognized the voice over the radio, it does retroactively make the levels 100 times funnier. Eggman was languishing in a room in his base, locked up by one of his creations as it ran around role-playing as him, and what does he do when he manages to get in contact with a detective agency outside? He makes them search for hermit crabs, and collect bingo chips, and sneak around the jungle so that they weren't seen by frogs. Dude, your priorities are a little screwed up. And not only that, he was racking up his bill this whole time by sending them on all these unnecessary fetch quests. And then he can't even cough up the money when it's billing time, claiming he'll pay the Chaotix once he takes over the world. It's truly hilarious to see him try to screw these guys who were just trying to keep the lights on, with them responding in kind by having their resident toddler on drugs beat the ever-loving shit out of him for it. But the story doesn't stop there, because as you might have noticed, it'd be a bit anticlimactic. There's this whole Metal Sonic thing going on after all, so we've got to have a final story segment unlockable to us for completing all the rest, right? Well, sort of. True, there is a final story segment similar to the adventure games before this point, which unlocks at the end of all the other playthroughs, but because Heroes is also trying to emulate a lot of the more arcade-style conventions of the Genesis classics, the Chaos Emeralds are no longer exclusively story items, which means that you must obtain them through special stages. And I don't know how to break this easy, but these special stages are horrible. Getting there is a feat in and of itself, requiring you in the second act of each zone to locate a key and take it to the end of the level. The location part in the key hunting is actually relatively easy. They're mostly in plain sight, and even if they're not, even a bit of mild exploration will turn them up, and there's usually a few in each stage. The not so easy part is the process of taking them to the end of the stage, because once you collect a key, just one hit will make it disappear, and this goes for deaths too. Remember how I said that Sonic Heroes is, janky and pretty unpolished even at the best of times? How much do you want to bet that this causes a lot of weird hits and even weirder deaths? If you guessed a lot, then you're probably starting to see the problem here. And then, that's not even accounting for the stages themselves, which see you belting it down a big tube with orbs you have to collect to charge your boost and dash toward the emerald to catch it before the timer runs out, all while avoiding spike balls that slow you down to a crawl. The controls in these special stages are awful, borderline uncontrollable, which doesn't make the prospect of precise movement all that appealing to try to pull off. At the very least, I would say this process is made a bit less painful if you collect the emeralds as Team Rose, because you need only collect them with one team, not all of them. And Team Rose's quick and easy stages will make the key hunting process much less time-consuming and painful, but that still doesn't make these special stages less terrible. Subjecting yourself to this pain will unlock the final story, though, and I do have quite a few positive things to say about that, so what's it all about, huh? Well, Metal Sonic finally reveals the plan he's been workshopping this whole time, which was to trick everybody here after copying all of their life data so he could make a public spectacle of 1, turning into a hellish kaiju, and 2, absolutely 100% killing Sonic. Of course, the friendship gang with the real superpower of cringy speeches isn't about to let him trample all over their good times, and decide to unite in a big ensemble cast shonen battle against the robot Xenomorph and put a stop to all of his shenanigans once and for all. What ensues is a final boss made of 2 primary forms. The first is Metal Madness, which pits the 3 non-Team Sonic teams against Metal in individual rounds. This boss, unlike a lot of the others before it, is actually fairly well designed. It's pretty easy, granted, but it makes more creative use of the actual formations than any other boss up until this point, and has stationary attack patterns to figure out rather than just being an on-rails vehicle that you smash into whenever it decides to sit still. With each round, he gets a bit more progressively difficult, ending after 3 thrashings when he decides to grow wings and take to the skies. Realizing that now is the best time to whip out the traditional battle in the sky routine, Sonic decides to use the Chaos Emeralds to transform into Super Sonic. But not content to let their buddy go it alone, Tails and Knuckles also share in the power and get golden shields, I guess. Kinda lame that their super forms from Sonic 3 aren't represented faithfully here, but hey, can't win them all, I guess. That inconsistency is more than made up for, I feel, in one of the most thematically kick-ass final bosses of the entire series, Metal Overlord. This fight is not only strong in that it's just fun, but it's also thematically strong, and presentation-wise, it's a joy to the eyes and ears. Equipped with your super forms, you're ready to teach this guy a lesson. He's been chasing your heels for years now. He was Amy's original tormentor. He took advantage of everyone's personalities to drag them all here, and now he wants to lay you out for all to see? No way. Metal's not looking for a race anymore, and if it's a fight he wants this time, he's going to get one. He expresses his reasoning for even doing this in the first place, and it's something that in recent years has really provoked some thought for me more than it did as a kid. He says that though he was created for the sole purpose of destroying Sonic, he never could, and this led him to feel a deep existential fear that he would never be anything more, unable to reach any kind of individuality or self-actualization, as he was constantly trapped behind this impossible barrier. This hellish transformation is Metal's desperate attempt to not only surpass Sonic, but become something else entirely, something unique, something other than just Metal Sonic. But in the end, obviously his ambitions have to be stopped, pitiable or not. As you bear down on him fighting your way through the skies, one of Crush 40's greatest songs, What I'm Made Of, plays in the background, and it reminds you just as potently what stands out about these final boss themes in this era of Sonic games. Most final bosses carry foreboding themes that emphasize what a threat they are, but these aren't like that. These themes are made to emphasize how badly these guys screwed up by picking a fight with you. Formations at the ready, you tank your way through specialized attack after specialized attack. Sonic busting through mirror blasts, Tails thunder shooting crystal traps out of thin air, and Knuckles obliterating entire fleet ships that Metal flings at him with earth-shattering punches. Incrementally, you build up more and more team blasts, barraging Metal for all he's worth, as even in the midst of overwhelming odds, Tails and Knuckles reiterate that they're with you until the very end. Eventually, the beast finally topples, and it's all over. So ends Metal Sonic's ambitions, and one of my favorite final bosses of all time. Crashing back down in his standard form, Metal questions why he still wasn't enough to beat Sonic, to which Sonic glibly responds, "Because we're Sonic heroes." I don't know why he does that. It'd probably be more fitting to say something along the lines of, Metal could copy everything from them, but he couldn't copy having friends who stick beside you no matter what, or whatever, but oh well. Putting it out there that Metal can feel free to challenge him again anytime and that he'll be waiting, Sonic runs off pursued by Amy. Rouge decides to go after the Master Emerald, with Knuckles chuckling to himself that she's back to her old tricks, before similarly running after. Team Chaotix resume their chase after Eggman to pound their payment out of him, and Omega and Shadow, two characters just as familiar with some of Metal's plights, carry his broken chassis in a way that seems as if they may feel a bit sorry for him, a visual I think not enough people mention. Finally, in the end, we get one last shot of Team Sonic dashing off towards new adventures, one more cheesy title drop, and then our credits, thus ending Sonic Heroes. It's hard to deny that this game doesn't have its share of problems, but it's also hard for me to deny the amount of pure charm and nostalgia I feel towards it. Looking back on this game and playing it again in the modern day, I'm reminded of how many aspects it contains of the series from this era that I dearly miss. The unique locales, the charming character interactions, the amazing soundtrack. Oh, shoot, right, the soundtrack. I mean, not that modern Sonic outings don't still have amazing soundtracks too. I wouldn't want you to mistake me there, but you didn't seriously think I was gonna go this whole video without talking about that, right? There's no way I could, because Heroes has one of my favorite Sonic soundtracks of all time. I'm not sure my nostalgia would allow me to place it above either adventure title, granted, but it's definitely right behind them. Each track perfectly encapsulates the mood and tone of the zone that you're in. Just take a listen at a sample of some of my favorite tracks, will ya? And of course, this definitely extends to the vocal themes as well. Each team sports their own collective vocal theme this time, instead of one for each major character. And yeah, a lot of them are still chock full of cheese, but they're certified bangers in their own right nonetheless. We Can is the theme of Team Sonic, performed by the returning Ted Poley and Tony Harnell. It's a brisk, upbeat, and cheery anthem that perfectly encapsulates the camaraderie of the main trio. Follow Me is the theme of Team Rose, composed by Jun Senoue and performed by Kay Hanley, with lyrics by Matilda O'Rourke. It's a very sweet song that I definitely love listening to, but it does frankly seem to be more about Amy than either Cream or Big, which is a bit disappointing. This Machine, performed by Julian Kay, is the theme of Team Dark, and is easily my favorite of the vocal themes. A grungy headbanger that captures all of the cartoonish angst of this trio, but also sells their bond with each other quite well. And finally, last but not least, is Team Chaotix, performed by Gunnar Nelson, which is, well, obviously the theme of Eggman. No, it's the theme of Team Chaotix, though. A funky theme song-esque hype track for the Chaotix themselves. It always puts a smile on my face to listen to. There's not much else to mention that I haven't already from this point, probably. To speak more generally, the graphics are pretty impressive and great looking for this console generation. There are certain things that stick out here more than others as looking a bit JPEG-y or rough around the edges, but overall there's nothing here that I'd say wasn't impressive for the time. The models in the FMV cutscenes can look a bit weirdly stiff though, there's no denying that. The models in gameplay are so extremely shiny, looking even more like plastic models than even the Sonic Adventure DX models did sometimes. Still, it's not the worst thing ever, I just prefer to mod the shininess down when playing by my lonesome. The voice acting is also as great as ever, the English dub retaining a lot of the same stiltedness of early game dubs, but also the excellent adventure cast, who make their last return for a console game and do a great job pulling out some of their best performances up until this point, barring Tails, who is another new kid to the table, but I'm not going to give him too hard of a time because he was just a kid, and frankly, I feel it'd be a bit disheartening to hear your voice trashed online for years, so he doesn't need any more of it from me today. The Japanese cast, however, remains my favorite, which is why I often tend to play all of my Sonic games with the original vocal track when possible. They're just the most consistent cast, and that familiarity has made me very fond of them. Sonic Heroes, while a flawed experience, which can sometimes get quite maddening depending on how much time you sink into it, is still an extremely fun game, with a simple yet effective storyline that really feels like the end of an era for this franchise. It's got a lot of heart, and most of all, it really seems to want to innovate the 3D Sonic playstyle in its own unique way. And the Sonic franchise has never been one to rest on its laurels and refrain from trying something wildly different. Some would call it a detriment, and at times I would agree. But I also think I prefer it this way too. Part of Sonic's appeal is that it's always trying new and exciting things. It's this sense of innovation that Sonic Heroes brings to the table that makes its identity uniquely its own. And when combined with everything I already loved about this series, it's something I can look back on very fondly, flaws and all. Now then, any last tidbits to cover? I could talk about the multiplayer. No, but I don't have any friends, so that won't work. Oh, maybe I could talk about each Chaotix mission. No, that ship's already sailed. I feel disconnected to bring it up now. Okay, I think I've got it. It's time to explain just what exactly gives Big the Cat such raw sex appeal. Hey everyone, thanks for watching my silly Sonic Heroes video essay. Leave a like and a comment down below to endear me to the YouTube algorithm, it really helps. I have a Patreon where you can support my work and earn rewards for your trouble as well, and of course subscribing and ringing the bell guarantees you'll see when I make something new. It also gets the channel another step closer to my promised 50k sub special, where I'll torture myself into making a long essay piece about Shadow the Hedgehog, and you wouldn't want to pass up the chance to make me suffer, now would you? Thanks again for sticking around, I'll see you in the next one, peace.